Did you know that F1 pit stops used to take over a minute? Well, there's a lot more that's changed since then. Welcome to Nobody Drives. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment for more. Let's start. It's time to look back at how far the F1 pit stop has come. In the early days, the tires were changed by hand, and this resulted in some painfully slow pit stops. And I don't blame the guys doing the work because they had to crawl underneath the car with a big wrench in order to get the job done. But this was obviously not ideal, and teams started looking for other options. The first documented instance of an electric tire changer being used in Formula 1 was by Ferrari in 1976. This made the process much faster, and it meant that they didn't have to put the car on jacks. And when you watch footage of these early pit stops, it's clear that the team members are risking their lives by crawling under these cars. So the introduction of the electric tire changer was a big step forward. But if we fast forward to 1981, we can see that the pit stops still take a while. But the introduction of the refueler completely changes the game. This is because fuel was one of the biggest consumables during those days, and getting rid of the need to manually pump fuel from a can into the car saved a ton of time. And we've actually got a pretty good idea of how long a full refueling would take, because we know that in 1981, the Lotus team had an average refueling time of 24 seconds. This isn't the only improvement that happened during this era. Another big change was the introduction of the air jack. This allowed the team to lift the car without having to use traditional jacks. And this was a huge improvement because it eliminated the need to place the jacks in the correct position and wait for the car to be lifted. And although these upgrades made the pit stops much faster, they weren't perfect because the refueling process was still quite dangerous. This is something that nearly claimed the life of a McLaren mechanic in 1988 when he was engulfed by flames after a fuel hose burst. Thankfully, he managed to make a full recovery, but it really highlighted the dangers of refueling during a race. As a result of this incident and other similar incidents, the FIA decided to ban open refueling. This meant that teams had to come up with another way to refuel their cars during races, and that's when the concept of closed refueling was born. This system consisted of a retractable hose that was connected to the car's fuel tank. The hose could be retracted into the bodywork of the car when it wasn't in use, which eliminated the need to have mechanics run around the car with cans of fuel. This system also allowed the fuel to flow directly into the car's tank without the need for a pump, which saved even more time. One of the biggest advantages of closed refueling is that it reduced the amount of human error. With open refueling, there was always the risk that a mechanic could make a mistake and put the fuel in the wrong place. But with closed refueling, the hose was connected directly to the fuel tank, so there was no room for error. And the introduction of this technology led to a massive decrease in pit stop times. In fact, during the 1990s, the average pit stop time for a fuel and tire change was less than 10 seconds. This was a huge improvement over the days when pit stops could take more than a minute. But the introduction of the refueler also caused a few problems. One of the biggest issues was that it created a bottleneck in the pit lane. This is because all of the cars had to line up to refuel, which slowed down the pace of the race. Additionally, it also made overtaking more difficult because teams could only refuel their cars during pit stops. So it was very risky to let another car overtake you because you might lose out on the chance to refuel. And finally, it also created a safety hazard. If a car was involved in an accident, the fuel could spill onto the track and cause a fire. This was a serious concern for the marshals and the firefighters who had to respond to any accidents. As a result of these concerns, the FIA decided to ban refueling in Formula 1 in 2010. This decision was controversial because it would eliminate one of the most exciting parts of the sport, which is the pit stop. But the safety concerns were too great to ignore and the ban was eventually introduced. And now that we're into the 2020s, it's fair to say that the pit stop has become a race-winning weapon, and this is due to a few key factors. The first one is that teams have been able to reduce the weight of the cars. This means that the tires don't have as much force on them, and therefore they don't wear out as quickly. Another factor is that teams have developed new compounds of tires that are more durable, and teams are now able to choose the right tires for the right conditions. And finally, the introduction of the intermediate and extreme wet tires has reduced the number of pit stops for a tire change. These tires allow the cars to race in conditions that were previously too wet for racing. And all these factors have led to a massive decrease in the number of pit stops per race. For example, during the 2021 season, the average number of pit stops per race was just 1.8. This is a huge improvement over the days when there were up to 5 pit stops per race. And in addition to reducing the number of pit stops, teams have also been able to reduce the time it takes to make a pit stop. This is because the wheels are now changed by machines instead of by hand, and the pit crews are now much smaller than they used to be. For example, during the early days of Formula 1, there were up to 15 people working on a pit stop, but today there are usually only 6 or 7 people. And this has led to some incredible pit stop times. In fact, the current record for the fastest pit stop is 1.82 seconds, which was set by Red Bull at the 2019 Mexican Grand Prix. And it's mind-blowing to think that the same task took over a minute not too long ago. So what makes this possible? Well, there's a few things going on here. The first thing is that the crew has to practice a lot in order to get the timing down perfectly. They also need to have a very efficient system in place in order to complete the pit stop as quickly as possible. But perhaps the most important factor is that the crew needs to be able to anticipate what's going to happen next. This means that they need to be able to predict when the car is going to arrive at the pit stop and when it will be ready to go again. And this level of precision is really what sets the top teams apart from the rest. They're able to anticipate what's going to happen, and they're able to react accordingly. This allows them to complete the pit stop in record time. When you look at the crew during a pit stop, it might seem like there's a lot of chaos going on, but there's actually a lot of coordination and precision involved. Each member of the crew has a specific job to do, and they have to do it in the perfect amount of time. For example, the person who's changing the tires has to be able to do it quickly, but they also have to make sure that the tires are on properly. If they're not, the car could have a blowout and crash. And then there's the person who's refueling the car. They have to be able to do it quickly, but they also have to make sure that the car doesn't catch fire. If it does, the whole pit lane could explode. And finally, there's the person who's driving the car. They have to be able to bring the car in at the right speed and in the right position. If they're too fast or too slow, the pit stop will take longer than it needs to. And all of these people have to work together in perfect harmony in order for the pit stop to be successful. And this is why the best teams are able to complete the pit stop in such record times. They have a system in place that allows them to predict what's going to happen, and they're able to react accordingly. And this is what sets them apart from the competition. So the next time you're watching an F1 race and there's a pit stop, remember all the hard work that goes into making it happen. It's not just a quick stop for some new tires and fuel. It's a carefully coordinated dance between the crew and the driver that can make all the difference in the race. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and check out my others. I hope you learned something about how far the F1 pit stop has come. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment for more. See you next time.